Henry, a young street musician, fills underground passages with emotional tunes. He's used to putting all his heart into his singing, even when nobody is walking past him. Music is something that occupies the most of his life. When he doesn't sing a song, he listens to it, and unfortunately, the latter is exactly what causes a terrible accident. While crossing a road, a car hits him unexpectedly, and this is how his life is forever changed. His perspective shifts to his sister, named Franny. She's traveling in the colorful East, observing the foreign culture. She seems like a natural part of a culture that is completely different from her own. She walks along busy, sunny streets and colorful bazaars before going to her place. She's a photographer and a journalist, conducting research on site. One morning, she receives a call from her mother. Anxiousness and reluctance are emanating from the phone even before the mother starts speaking. There is some dreadful news she has to convey, and it is not going to be easy. She tells Franny about Henry's accident and asks her to come home. Shortly after, Franny arrives at the door of her brother's hospital room and greets her mother, Karen, warmly and sorrowfully. As the doctor informs her shortly after, there is a hematoma in Henry's brain. He's in a coma, and the doctors cannot say for sure whether he will or will not be able to come out of it. Patience is the main way to go in these kinds of gloomy situations. The conversation between the mother and the daughter is slow burning in the next scene. To avoid thinking about and discussing the subject of the accident, they speak about Franny's new hairstyle instead. Karen fails to maintain this harmony, though. It's clear that she blames herself. She should have been more attentive to him. She should have urged him to be more careful. She feels like a failed mother, and no words from Franny can change that now. From their conversation, we also learn that Franny's father isn't around anymore to experience this situation with them. Coming back home, she sees her room filled with boxes. Due to her constant travels, Karen decided to give her room to a girl named Sylvia, who delivers mail. Franny will need to sleep in Henry's room. The room itself speaks a lot about Henry. Music is the main theme of the entire area. Franny finds something that breaks her heart then. It is a CD dedicated to her, in which Henry sings his own songs. It seems that he wanted Franny to be among the people who first listen to and critique his art. Franny finds it tough to listen to it, and it is almost impossible to determine what she feels in this moment. In the next scene, however, as she speaks to his brother in his coma, we get a little insight into her perspective. She's confused and afraid of things that might come. Franny spends her days in the hospital, waiting for Henry to wake up. Rage and extreme sorrow conquer her heart all at once. One night, she opens up Henry's notebook and sees a quote from a songwriter named James Forrester. She flicks through the pages then and finds a ticket to the latter's concert. She decides to go. In a loud underground area in which the counselor is about to be held, she walks around for a while and comes to a room with a stage. Shortly after, James Forrester comes on, and soon Franny understands how much Henry's music was inspired by this man's artistic vision. Instantly, she feels a sudden, strong gravity towards his music and, more importantly, towards him as a person. The first song ends with delightful violin tunes, and after the concert starts, a long process of meeting fans and signing shirts begins. When everyone leaves and James himself prepares to exit the building, Franny walks up to him, praises his show, and tells him about Henry. James shows a lot of concern and affection, but he says with great remorse that he doesn't remember ever meeting him or reading one of his letters. Finally, Franny hands him Henry's songs and asks him to listen to them at his leisure. After coming back home, Karen asks her something about her new book. It seems like Franny followed the trail of her mother when she decided to link her own life to writing. Now, in the light of recent events, however, all of it seems so futile. The course of Franny's following days is determined by his strong drive to get to know his brother better, and the way he lived. And using his notebook for that endeavor, she visits Henry's favorite places. As a consequence, Franny meets a lot of interesting people and listens to many interesting, passionate performances. One morning, the desire to see her brother awake is so irresistible that she is led to do something unusual. Walking up to Henry's bed, she touches his eyelids and pulls them up to see his eyes. In exactly that moment, someone enters the room, and thinking that it's surely a doctor, she jumps back and immediately starts looking for ways to justify her actions. But instead of being a doctor, the man who enters the room turns out to be none other than James Forrester. Franny is abashed. The mere fact that James has arrived here says a lot about his personality. He brought some coffee, too. Henry would have been especially happy to hear his words next. James says that he liked his songs a lot. He asks if he could sing a song in Henry's presence. Perhaps that will turn out to be helpful. Naturally, Franny is quick to agree. And as the room begins to drown in his song, she looks over to her little brother. It's hard to say what she feels in this moment. The only person to consciously listen to James's song is her, so in a way, one could even say that James is singing this song to her. For a very brief moment, their eyes meet, and we get a sense that this is exactly what they feel, but only throughout a fraction of a second. When the song ends, Karen enters the room. Franny is quick to introduce James to her, and a short time later, she sees the latter out of the hospital. Before saying goodbye, she invites him to come to an event. It is held in a place that Henry used to love, and even though she hasn't been there yet, she is sure it is going to be great. It is clear that a very delicate bond has been formed between them today. Franny and Karen watch a clip of a song that Henry made a while ago. The action takes place in front of a building with a brick wall. Inspired by this, Franny visits this place in the next scene. She wants to engage with the society that her brother used to inhabit. From the inside, the building is a sunny, nice place. There is a separate room for Henry, where all the necessary equipment that he used is stored. Franny starts looking for a gramophone. Henry used to have one, but shortly before the accident, it got ruined. The music store she enters initially doesn't have gramophones at this moment, so all she ends up buying is a beautiful vintage keyboard. That night, James and she have their first date. Their conversation is quiet and shy, especially because of Henry. He tells her about his music career and life in general. It is obvious that he isn't used to talking about himself, especially in front of girls. He also reveals to Franny that he is going through a kind of writer's block. In short, they share some general details of their lives at first, until Franny decides to tell him more. And it is here that we understand the real reasons for her recent actions. It seems that she and Henry were in a big fight before the accident. For 6 months, they didn't talk, and even though Henry sent countless albums and music clips to Franny, she didn't open a single one of them. Henry dropped out of college to become a musician, and this is the sole reason for the argument that severed their relationship. And now Franny thinks she can never have her brother back. Feeling guilty and hopeless, she seeks to share this feeling with James, but unfortunately, this is the exact moment when two fans walk up. And so, his chance to show empathy is gone. 2 hours later, they listen to the performers one after another, and holding hands, they enjoy the art of many people. James shares his own troubles with Franny afterwards. After holding 3 performances in New York, he must go home, and the creative block that is eating him from the inside fills him with fear that he may never be able to get back the sense of meaning that goes along with writing a new song. Franny proposes a simple solution. He could write a flimsy song about the simplest thing, a nose. For example, coming up with rhymes mustn't be terribly difficult. James follows this advice, and together they come up with a tune that is perhaps even worse than flimsy, but they have a lot of fun in the process, so that isn't important at all. They spend the entire night together, and the next morning they arrive in the hospital, holding a gramophone. James says goodbye then, and Franny starts playing some terrible music in Henry's room. Guilt drives her mad. She stops and whispers to her little brother, asking for forgiveness. She fills the room with Henry's favorite sounds and smells, hoping that this will make him wake up, but the boy remains unconscious. At night, there are some other things that occupy Franny's mind, though, and these are the thoughts of James. His indie tunes are the only things that bring a sense of security and hope to her in these times of guilt and fear. One night, she is woken up by a strange sound coming from downstairs. When she goes down to investigate, she finds Karen preparing paella. The 4th of June is Henry's birthday, and Karen has always made paella for him. Franny dresses up for the next day, decorates Henry's room, and talks to him about the old times. In the afternoon, James comes to the birthday too. They play a silly game together then, and all seems to be fine for a while. But suddenly out of nowhere, Karen and Franny begin arguing. Out of the simplest of reasons comes a conflict filled with shifting blame. Neither of them were perfect friends with Henry, but after feeling that Karen blames her for not being there with him more, Franny steps back to become protective and aggressive. For a while, they go at each other from different angles as poor James moves around in his chair awkwardly. Finally, when the fight ends and silence falls, he manages to eliminate the tension by making a silly joke, and all returns to normal again. Karen likes him a lot, so she invites him over for dinner. Franny goes to his concert that night and sees how he quiets some of the wildest crowds. Listening to him sing almost petrifies the audience with dazzling tunes and lyrics that make people's dreams float up to the surface of their consciousness. No wonder Henry liked his songwriting. After the concert, she meets some other singers backstage and leaves the building together with James. They go to the roof of his studio, and facing the vast cityscape, they finally reveal their feelings to each other. The night continues with passion and love as the initial part of their relationship is concluded. The empty space that used to separate the two is now destroyed as the distance between them evaporates. James shows her his collection of CDs then, and almost the entire rest of the night is filled with laughs and silly jokes. The fan letters and gifts serve as a source of numerous conversation subjects, and time flies by almost seamlessly. They visit a jazz event, and the space where even the air seems to be blue concludes their night perfectly. Even Franny is eager to sing, and even Henry's accident seems to leave her conscious mind for a while. The fact that she finds it in herself to sing along shows that an incredible amount of weight is taken from her shoulders when she spends time with James. Troubles seem to be gone on this roof, from which the enormous city seems to fit on a palm of a hand. The next day, during dinner, Karen tells the couple about her younger days. Pre-sanitized years in Paris and wild times. She seems to remember her old days as exciting. In Paris during the 1970s, she spent the most cliché yet one of the most fulfilling times of her life. She even had an affair with a rock star back then. And as she says, this is the reason why she can play one of the most difficult songs ever written on guitar, Blackbird by Paul McCartney. Even James doesn't know how to play it. As time goes on, Karen continues to go on and on about herself. She takes out a green accordion she bought for Henry at his birthday years later and starts playing it. She's actually good at it. Henry must have gotten his talent from his mother. As time flies, Karen's attitude seems more and more unnatural. It almost feels as if she is trying to avoid thinking about her boy's accident. The immeasurable sense of grief is too strong for her to endure at times, so this behavior of hers might even be determined by her irresistible drive to cope with dark times. She puts on Franny's song. It seems like the latter used to sing a lot when she was younger, and there was one particular song that she liked to perform the most. And even though she's extremely reluctant to go back to those times and try to find her lost talent, both Karen and James are so enthusiastic to hear her sing that she is left with no other choice but to try it out anyway. Consequently, a new, unknown part of Franny's personality reveals itself in front of James, and while listening, he seems to fall in love with her even more. Karen, on the other hand, seems to be covered in sadness after this lovely performance. Her recent attitude seems to have evaporated completely as Franny was singing, and now she is left pretending that everything is all right with her. She just needs to go to sleep. And so, excusing herself, she leaves Franny and James alone. They visit yet another concert that night. The music helps express love, as the energetic concert is turned into yet another private session held by James only for Franny. He begins singing a song he's been working on recently. It seems that he's slowly coming out of the writer's block. The conversation they have that night while scoping the night city's landscape outlines the future of their relationship. The day after tomorrow, James will have to go to Philadelphia to perform at a wedding. And no words are needed to express how much of a shame it is that they must depart ways in such a short time. The next morning, Franny looks through Henry's notebook once more and realizes that she has read through it entirely. She has used up every possible method to bring her little brother back, and the sense of doom is quick to penetrate her entire being. A tide of hopelessness seems to take her away as she begs Henry to come back. To even think about the notion of his passing is enough for her to shut her mind to analyzing its aftermath. It seems to Franny that it will be completely impossible for her to deal with the intrusive thoughts and feelings of guilt. We see James at the wedding in the next scene. The expression on his face is enough to determine that he's not in the best mood of his life. It is obvious that this isn't the place for him. It mustn't be a part of his destiny to perform at weddings. There is much more to him than that. And so, as he takes photos with the bride, he looks terribly out of place. He visits Franny and Henry that night. A wide smile stretches across Franny's face immediately after seeing him enter. Now, during this night, James finally breaks the ice and sings his new song. Looking anxious and restless, he starts strumming his guitar and humming a peaceful tune when suddenly, Franny jumps up from her chair in one rapid movement. By some miracle, Henry's eyes are open. He has woken up, and for the duration of the next 2 seconds, Franny seems to be the happiest human being on the face of the earth. But this happiness disappears immediately as Henry's consciousness is again dragged back into the blankness of a coma. Franny runs the corridors, searching for doctors or nurses. Soon, together with a professional, she is back with James and Henry, and waits around for any kind of information. This seems to be the moment that will determine the major course of her life. Unfortunately, Henry is still in a coma. Karen comes to the hospital then too, and in trying to encourage her son, she spends the entire night by his side. Franny looked as hopeless as ever the next morning. Without any special intent, she plays the keyboard she bought earlier, and looks at her brother when, suddenly, she sees his eyes as they open up once more. She gets to him immediately, then watches as her brother finally comes back to his senses. Compared to before, now there is an unquestionable sense of consciousness in Henry's sight and expression. For a few seconds, both Franny and her brother seem to fall into a petrified state in front of each other, until the latter opens his mouth and calls his sister by her name. Tears start falling from her eyes, and she kisses him on the forehead, encouraging him to keep his eyes open. She looks for James in the hospital corridors, hoping to share this immeasurable happiness with him, but he isn't to be found anywhere that entire day. Karen realizes she can finally enjoy some food that night. Both the mother and the daughter share a moment of relief. After all this time, they can finally say that they are through with this terrifying time of their lives. James performs at the concert that night, which concludes his visit to New York. Of course, Franny wants to attend it, but after arriving in the concert hall, she is told that the event is all sold out. Franny is able to still hear the voice of James, however, coming from the TV that is hung on the wall, and the words she hears particularly warm her heart. James is about to perform his newest song, and as an introduction to it, he says that he wrote this song for 2 people he recently met. Naturally, it is dedicated to them and the experiences they went through together. Franny doesn't need to be there in front of the main stage to feel enormous love for the person singing the song. And from the way she looks at the TV, and from the words James sings, we get a feeling that, as heartbreaking as their inevitable separation might seem, the bond that was set between Franny and James was definitely worth it. Coming back to his car after the concert, James sees an envelope on the hood of his car, and opening it up, he sees that there is a CD inside. He puts it on his radio, and the sound of the only song Franny and he performed together fills every corner of his car. There is no question about it, the time they spent together will have an everlasting effect on both of their lives.